Hi everybody. So we've got together this evening with Theresa and Sam to have a conversation about their experiences of expressing after they had their babies. So I'm going to ask you first really is, before you had your babies, what thoughts did you have on expressing? Did you have a plan? Did you have ideas? Did you have hopes, dreams? Were you worried about it?
I thought it was going to be easy, but that was just breastfeeding in general. I'll let you go first, Theresa.
Oh no. I think I was quite worried about it. I'm generally a bit of an overthinker, and I was quite convinced that, despite the fact I really wanted to breastfeed, that it wasn't going to work. And then even if it did work, the thought of pumping, it seemed very complicated. It was like pumping and then storing, and how much you store, and yeah. Oh my gosh, I've got to make sure I've got all this milk ready for when I'm due back to work, because my baby will starve, and things like that. So yeah, I do remember it seemed very like, I probably took in too much information. And I think when you're not in the context of like already breastfeeding and understanding how that works, adding in like the pumping information was like, what am I gonna do? But yeah, that's me.
I think I thought well, a friend gave me some really good advice beforehand, and she'd successfully breastfed 2 of her children, and it had just gone quite well from the start, so she was kind of that barometer, I suppose. But she just said, listen, don't put too much pressure on yourself. Anything that you need, any items that you need, there's always Amazon Prime, and there's always a supermarket open. So don't stock up on unnecessary stuff, meaning like a breast pump and bottles and things like that, and sterilising equipment and that kind of thing. Just kind of see how you go. And I ended up sending hubby to Argos one Sunday afternoon or something to go and get a breast pump. And fairly early days, maybe about 3 or 4 weeks in. But I think one of the things as well that you tend to think beforehand is you'll express and it'll just happen and it'll be fine. And you'll just express and your partner can take over and they can do a feed, and and that'll be quite easy. And then actually when you're in it, you start to then realize that it's very different, because you need to, even though they're doing a feed, you need to express to make sure you're sending that signal to your boobs to remove the milk and that kind of thing. And I remember thinking it was a way of getting some time back for me, and it never was. So I think there's a bit of a disparity. I don't know where it comes from, because again, it's like my partner can give the bottle and then they can bond with the baby and all that kind of thing, can't they? But I don't know where it comes from, but there's almost this sort of subliminal message that gets through when you're pregnant, and that's what you're going to do, and it's all going to mean that you get time back for yourself. So I don't know.
Why do you think that comes up, this idea about needing that time back, that almost the amount of time that feeding a baby takes up is in some way inhibiting or normal?
I think I've been reading a lot lately about so Lucy Weber and Amy Brown have been putting a few things on their Facebook posts lately about just this massive pressure for women to just snap back into their old routine. So babies then need to be in a routine, you need to be in a routine, and everything needs to be, you get this phrase, getting your life back. And I suppose expressing might be a part of that, and it might be what gets you your life back. But actually, I'd say you don't go into having a baby thinking that your life is going to be the same as before. I don't think I didn't, but there's still that pressure to be I suppose a certain way after.
And do you think there's pressure to express?
I just think it's become a bit of has it become a bit normalised? I don't know. Has it become a bit expected? It's just what you do when you breastfeed, which is kind of ironic because it's not breastfeeding, is it?
I think it comes up a lot. Like I've seen, these people that object to like breastfeeding in public. They're like, oh, you should just express and put it in a bottle for when you go out, because just expressing is this like super easy thing that, you put the pump to your breast, exactly the right amount of breast milk comes out with no strain or stress or anything. It's perfectly easy to then work out how you're going to store it, how you're going to heat it up. It's going to take exactly that amount of breast milk when you're in public. They're not going to want another feed 10 minutes later. It's all like, it's just like, I think because it's always, just express, like just do this, and the word just in front of it makes it seem like it's no big deal, and then you're actually in it and you're like, actually this is kind of a big deal because it's just not straightforward.
The packaging, and when you can't do it now, but when you're walking around mother care when you're expecting your baby and you everything's being advertised at you, breast pumps and things like that, or they use phrases like maximum milk output and comfort settings, and just it's almost, the language is very much, I don't know, it sort of makes you think that it almost creates more of a problem sometimes as well, because you start to worry about, do I need maximum milk? And you start to panic.
I still remember using, because I think early on I got a breast pump just because I had quite an unevenness going on, and my baby very much focused on one side, and I had that in my head that I needed to pump on the other side to kind of even it out. Not that ever worked.
Build up the supply in one side.
And I still remember the first time putting it to me and being like, nothing's coming out. Like, why is nothing coming out? And then I suppose if you don't know enough about pumping and the action of the pump and how a baby is more efficient, like your brain just goes, oh my gosh, I've actually got no milk, and so it's not quite as easy as just like sticking a pump on and then barely going.
You learn a lot really quickly when you embark on it. You just learn so much. I started off with a hacker, and I think it was through the sort of the Bristol Breastfeeding Mummies Forum that I thought, well, I'll just try this, because initially I started using it, I think, to build up supply, and also it was an option. I'd got really, really bad cracked nipples, so it was kind of like shields and expressing was a way to get through that. And then there was things like getting the right, love this word, flange size. So you had to, and you had to order bigger ones of those because it was rubbing, and obviously with cracked nipples, horrendous. But I started off with a hacker, and everybody was saying that how wonderful they were, and I expected to get loads, but I got very little initially, and I could never express much anyway. I did it for a number of different reasons. So I initially did it for supply, and then I think I did it for top-ups where I could, because we were doing top-ups for quite a while, and then I also did it so that we could leave baby as well, and we could go for a weekend away. That was the weekend we discovered I had high lipase, because I didn't test it before we went. That was horrendous. So we basically left baby with a load of milk, and she wouldn't have it at all for a weekend.
So just by way of explanation, this high lipase is a hormonal thing, and sometimes it can make milk taste a bit dodgy, and there's ways of and smell a bit dodgy, but you can tackle that by heating it before you freeze it. I'm interested in what you were saying there, Sam, because do you think, you know, well, both of you have said about not getting very much out, and that's something that so many mums do say. You know, they expect to get far more out, and then feel quite concerned about their supply. Maybe they haven't got enough. But equally, maybe not realising that babies take really quite a small amount of milk.
Yeah.
Because when you just look at a bottle, it's full in every magazine, on every TV programme. An emoji is a full bottle.
Cartoons, yeah.
Cartoons, absolutely everything. So we're just not used to seeing realistic images of how much milk a baby needs. So I always feel that actually, although yes, it could be genuinely very small amounts, and lots of mums say it kind of builds up, it's probably more than you think it is in terms of what your baby's needs might be.
Yeah, and I always fed from both sides as well at every feed, and that was something that just happened probably from the weight gain issues we had, and then it then set a precedent. So where I'd got friends, and one friend in particular who would she liked to express, so that when they were out and about she didn't have to breastfeed in public. She was quite worried about it initially, and that was fine for her, and that was how she chose to tackle it. And you know, she got on really well with that. She did breastfeed in public a few times with me once I was feeding my daughter, so that was like quite a nice thing as well. But she would feed baby first thing in the morning from one side and stick the breast pump on the other side, literally get like half a litre or something ridiculous. So I just remember those sort of like Tommy Tippy bottle things, the very sort of broad ones. She'd get one of those full, and then that would basically get put together, put in the cool bag, and she would go out, and that would be the feed when she's out with the baby that day. But I do always remember her, and when she was feeding the baby, it was much more watery. And whenever I expressed, it seemed as though it was a lot thicker. So I don't know whether it's just, some people produce volume, some people produce a little bit less volume, but actually the content, like you say, for your baby is right. But we're obsessed with this like volume amount kind of thing. I just remember being gutted, thinking, oh, for God's sake, why can't I do that?
So really frustrating for you when you were trying to achieve something similar, and it wasn't like that for you.
Yeah, it's so bizarre, but like I say,
and of course everything with how it works. So for both of you then, what would you say your top tips are for expressing?
Do you want to go first, Theresa?
Oh, yeah, I can do. I'm trying to think. I kind of got a bit more into the swing of it the second time around, because, well, I must have expressed quite a bit with the first. I don't think I was very organised about doing it. I just kind of did it when I did. But I ended up with a big freezer stash, and then coming up to going back to work, trying to like introduce a bottle and stuff. He didn't want it. He didn't want any of it. He was having none of it. So all of that milk I had to, because by the time that I had to like privately donate that through Human Milk for Human Babies, because it just was not getting used. So the second time around, from the beginning, I was like, right, I'm not going to bother so much with this giant freezer stash because it was a faff and never got used.
Yeah.
So I donated to the milk
pretty
bag.
gutting as well, isn't it? Yeah. It's really hard to do that. And
yeah.
So I donated that you'll never get back.
So the second time around, I signed up for the milk bank early on, because you can do that from 6 weeks to until your baby turns 7 months, at least in Bristol anyway. And then coming up to going back to work that time around, he did want the milk, and so I'm then desperately trying to rebuild my stash after having donated it all to go back to work. But anyway, that was a digression. I found kind of setting a time of day to do it was helpful, because you're kind of building in that extra feed for your body. And I found that the morning was a really good time for me. And I did used to do the pump on one side and feed on the other side at the facilitator, which obviously is a bit, you need to kind of get get comfortable with feeding in the first place, and then also having, you know, it's quite handsy and things. Once you get the knack of it, it can be quite, if you're struggling to get a bit of a letdown going just by pumping, having the baby on one side, and you know, that really did work for us. I think the other thing is, and it's just like a logistical thing, I used like the bags to store with my first, and I used to just kind of like plonk it down in the freezer like that, and all the milk would obviously like freeze then in this block at the bottom, and then after a while, when you've got that many in the freezer, you just can't fit any more in, and it gets really annoying. And I think the first as well, early on, I was freezing in whatever volume I got it. So if I pumped 4 ounces, I was putting that in. If I pumped 5 out, I was putting that in. And then of course you then come to defrost it and you're like, I don't actually want that much, but whatever I defrost I have to use. So the second time around it's like, right, freeze in smaller amounts, so like do 1 ounce or 2 ounces at a time, and freeze it flat, and then you can stack them nicely in the freezer. And it's just logistics, but it never occurred to me with my first, and then I caught up to it eventually.
After you've had kids though, you become a better strategic thinker, so clearly that's why. How did you kind of master the whole, because I really struggled even with a hacker, which you can obviously suction onto your boob and they're not meant to be able to kick it off or anything like that, but I really struggled with the sort of positioning and all that kind of thing, and I felt I never really quite got the knack. Did you have them across you and then the breast pump on, or did you do sort of underarm or anything fancy like that?
Yeah, I never really mastered underarm feeding, so he was always across. I think I'd have the breastfeeding pillow, I'd have him across, and then there's a thing you can do with like looping the pump into like I'd be wearing like a nursing or like a nursing bra, and you can like clip the pump into the nursing bra, and it kind of holds it in place and gives it that little bit of extra stability. And then I think it was like I started out when he was young enough that he wasn't quite as kicky, like so he wasn't quite as interested in like, oh, what's that, I'm gonna knock it off. And occasionally, because he was my second, like I'd be pumping in the morning when my first was kind of getting up and getting out of bed and coming in, and he'd be like, oh, and so I'd instruct him which buttons I wanted. Like if I didn't have a hand free, he would press the buttons on the pump for me, which could be quite risky if I didn't want the suction up quite as high, or but that could come in quite useful when I was juggling.
A bit of help.
That's
good. I think all those little tips that you forget, so definitely you get more out when you express in the morning, like ideally the first feed, I think they say, don't they? Isn't it sort of from after about 5 or 6 weeks, so that it doesn't interfere with supply? Or I think that's
what I've kind of said a lot of the time, because your body's going through that quite that big old process of working out how much milk to make for your individual baby. But after 6 weeks-ish, it's kind of thought that it's settled enough to kind of withstand some changes.
So sort of extra it'll meet, lower it'll balance out.
And of course people do express before 6 weeks, and sometimes people really need to for various different reasons. But when we're just talking about because you want to, there is that 6 weeks-ish guide. So if you do decide to do it beforehand, it's kind of about being a step ahead, really, listening to your body. Because if you're missing feeds because your baby's having milk that you've expressed, your body is going to react to that and think it has to make less. Equally, if you're pumping loads because you're building up your freezer stash, your supply is going to go up, which sounds great, but actually sometimes that can be a bit of a pain as well. So it's about just being really aware and in tune with what's going on, and remembering that it can be changed, it can be recovered, it can be fiddled with, but certainly after around 6 weeks-ish, it's easier to recover, it's easier to fiddle with it because your body has worked out where it is.
I found that Yeah, I think I tried sort of predominantly in the mornings. I think when we were first sort of starting, I did a whole sort of like 2-week block as well of expressing to try and build supply up. So that must have been maybe under that 6 week, maybe across that 6 week mark. I'm not sure. And that was tough. That was really tough because it was a sort of with the weight gain issues that we had, it was a case of feed and then feed, top up, and then express, and it was that kind of routine, and that would last an hour. So you'd do a feed for about 20 minutes. That was sort of how long she fed for, and then with that there was a whole sort of like breast compressions and switch feeding and all that kind of thing, and then it was top her up with however much she wanted. And then it was 15 minutes of expressing. And sometimes things took a bit longer, sometimes they took a bit less time, but generally it felt like it took a bit longer. So you do that for an hour, and then it might take an hour, 15 minutes. And then by the time you faffed about with the pump and stored it all and cleaned, you know, this, that, and the other, you've then got 45 minutes till they probably want feeding again. Because at that point, you know, it was kind of like every 2 hours, every 3 hours, that kind of thing. So I remember going in and seeing Anne at the Down End group, and it was after I'd been to see April, and we'd had that session with a lactation consultant, and she was saying, right, okay, so how are you getting on? And I was like, oh, we're doing this, but I said, I don't know how long I'm meant to do it for. It's like, well, how long have you been doing it? I was like, about 2 weeks, I'm exhausted. And she was kind of like, well, how do you feel it's going? And I was like, I'm not sure, I think we might be doing well. And it was that, and then she sort of said, well, you know, review it after a week and see how you feel. And then that was quite revelationary as well, because it was like I got into this situation and I was like, I don't know how to stop.
That's really interesting, yeah. And that comes up a lot, that you kind of quite often get told how to start doing something, but not then how to get back out of it again.
Yeah, you do that.
Up and yeah, that's really interesting, definitely. Sorry, Sam, go on.
I was going to say about, we mentioned it earlier about partners having the ability to feed.
Yeah.
And I think my partner, because we did top ups, my partner quite enjoyed doing that whole top up thing. And I suppose at the time I used to say, oh, I'll do it, it's okay. And he'd be like, no, I will kind of thing. And I think partners are very, very keen to get involved in those early days, and especially if it's maybe a first as well. And I think when we were about pressures as well, there can be pressures for family to want to bottle feed and that kind of thing. So there's another sort of, oh, you maybe want to express to do that as well. But there's a sort of, looking back on it now, we eventually got to a point where my husband stopped doing those top-ups because she went away from the top-ups, and then I was just 100% feeding her. And one of the things he says now is that actually, as a partner, if your partner's breastfeeding, one of the benefits is that you actually can't do anything. So you get a bit of time away to go and read a book, watch a bit of TV, do whatever. So when you're upstairs feeding the baby, putting them to sleep or things like that. But he found other ways to kind of do that sort of bonding. So right from the beginning, he's always done her bath time. He used to take her out for walks and things like that. And I think this sort of slight misconception that you have to feed a baby to bond with a baby, it's very lovely. And he did enjoy it. And he did miss it a little bit when he stopped doing it. But it really wasn't the be all and end all. And I think that's maybe one of the driving forces as well as to why you think, oh, I'm going to express, because then I can get time back for me and my partner can bond. And it's as if you're doing something, you know, you're doing them a favour kind of thing. So, and that's quite an interesting point.
It is a really interesting point. So from what you're saying, feeding is actually a very, very small bit of baby care. It's an important bit and it takes up a lot of time. But in the grand scheme of things, it's just one aspect. and that there are so many other things that you can do to care for a baby, to bond with a baby. And that all of those other things are incredibly important and really powerful.
And actually, breastfeeding to me, and I didn't realise how much until we sort of embarked on it, it became really important to me because it was my thing and it was something I can do and it was my achievement. And, you know, we had a really tricky start, so I was always really proud of the fact that we got through it. Me and her got through it. Yeah, my husband played a huge part in support and, you know, just championing it all the way. And I don't think we would have got through it without him. But at the same time, I've sort of shifted now, and I'm the first one to jump in and sort of when people sort of say, oh, but I want, you know, I want dad to be able to feed the baby. So has anybody got any bottle recommendations or things like that? That seems to come up quite a lot on forums and stuff. And I'm the first one to sort of say, have you actually, you know, it's not necessarily the way that you need to bond. There's loads of things they can do and they'll be so much more useful because you need to pump when they're feeding. I'm not sure, I can't quite remember the explicit rules on that because I don't think you always have to, because like Theresa said, you can just find a moment in the day to pump, can't you? But sometimes you might want to make sure you're doing it while they're doing that feed, and then it doesn't become time back for you. So actually, I thought the best thing in the world was my husband goes and baths the baby and I get to lie on the sofa and kind of comatose for 20 minutes.
You didn't have to be doing anything else.
And it's just, but that's something you just don't realise before, because you just think you can do everything. You think you'll just like swan through it and you'll just, you know, everything will be a breeze. But actually those moments, that time back for yourself, for your mental well-being and for your sort of just sanity, you really need, you know, you're not as heroic as you think you're going to be. You need time.
I found for us as well, because a lot of the things that don't, the thing that doesn't get talked about when you're told to just express so your partner can give a bottle is the idea that your baby's just going to take a bottle with no problem. And I found trying to introduce a bottle with the, not necessarily for those reasons, I kind of wanted to have a possibility of a bottle for like when I went back to work and if I wanted to go out at other times. And trying to introduce a bottle in the first place was really stressful because he wouldn't, like, to be honest, he never really took it very well anyway, but he certainly wouldn't do it if I was in the house, if there was a possibility of having milk on tap, and that aspect of it was really stressful because I'm hiding upstairs listening to my baby cry, hoping that my husband's doing it in, like, I've shown him videos on YouTube, right, this is how you pace bottle feed, because I'm terrified that my baby's going to take one drink from a bottle and it's never going to breastfeed again, hoping that he's doing it that way, and the baby's crying and I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, is this
why are you putting yourself through that?
Rest? Like, this is actually a lot more stressful than if, and me just kind of eventually going down, snatching the baby and putting him on my breast and being like, that was not worth it at all. But I know for us, like in terms of bonding, I mean, he's always like, he always did like the nighttime, especially with the first time around, he did all the nighttime nappies, and any time that I would kind of, because sometimes as a breastfeeding mum, when your baby gets to that point where they don't fall asleep after a breastfeed and you're like, right, what do I do with this baby now, because I don't know how to get you to sleep. I just kind of roll over, just nudge him, be like, right, this is an awake baby, I don't know what to do with it.
It's your turn now.
And he would kind of take over at that point. And again, with like bath times was a good one. We used to have on a Sunday, this was when we just had the one, so things were you know, different, but it was mummy's sacred bath day, so daddy would put baby in the sling. This is on maternity leave with the first one. Daddy put baby in the sling and go for a walk with the dog, mummy goes in the bath. And it was like, and I still remember, because that gave him time, they had their time together, and I still remember the first time I got out of the bath and was like, where's the baby? And he's like, oh, I put him down for a nap. And I was like, I've never put him down for a nap, like, how did you? And just from having that time, he'd figured out like, oh, he went in the cot for Daddy. He never did it for me. But it just was amazing to me that little bit of time then had given them that opportunity, because Daddy was going to be doing a lot of the childcare when I went back to work. It was like, oh, so he can do things, like it's not just, doesn't have to be me. And
did you find it really hard to let go?
Oh, definitely. I still do.
Yeah. But you feel like you should be doing absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And then you start to realise that you have to let your husband be a dad and be a really competent dad. And they're not going to get to that competent stage if you don't sort of throw them in the deep end and sink or swim kind of thing. So yeah, I remember that sort of, you know, moment of, right, you've really got to like leave them alone and just let him crack on. And you speak to some people sometimes and the dads are very hesitant and can be a bit more hands off. And I do sometimes think that's a bit of a shame, because actually if you sort of ring fence it, you need that help. It's good to have that help. Something you said there, Theresa, as well, about the baby taking a bottle. I had a friend on, an NCT friend, and she had a few sort of like parties and nights out organised in the sort of first year of baby feeding from her, and she had to, her baby would never ever take a bottle. He was just point blank refusing. I think eventually they got around it with a cup. And we had to do the same with my daughter as well eventually, because she went through a bottle refusal thing. But no, he was just adamant he was never going to have it. So she missed out on so many nights out, and not like, you know, big raging nights out, but kind of catching up with friends and things like that. But she did have a few friends that turned round to her and just said, "I'll just express and give him a bottle." And she was just like tearing her hair out, because she was like, what, do you think I've not thought of that? You know, well, I mean, what if I could? But so there's also this pressure from either other mums or other women to kind of like magically be able to, and you know, and she was okay at expressing. She, you know, it worked quite well for her, but nah, he was not having a bar of it. So yeah, that is tough. I think that's really tough, but it's not spoken about much.
No, that's something that I talk to quite a lot of families about, and I'm asked like really frequently, when's the window, when's the time that you absolutely must have introduced a bottle by to make sure that they always take one, and there isn't one. There is no evidence.
Yeah, because it's funny you say that, because with the second, because like, obviously you kind of, I think the trouble is sometimes you have a second baby and part of your brain is like, everything is going to go on exactly the same, you know, we're going to hit the same things at the same time.
Yeah.
So because we tried, I don't know, within the first 2 or 3 months with the bottle, and then didn't have any luck throughout the whole time he was kind of a bottle feeding baby. So with the second, we're like, I can't be bothered. Like, I'm not, you know, I'll give the milk to the milk bank, you know, we'll just forget it. Like, when it comes to go back to work, he'll take something, like he won't starve. And then, so we didn't try him with anything till much further down the line, and he just took it. So, which is why I was then at that surprise of like, I have no milk, like, what am I going to do? So yeah, it's like, because in my head I was like, oh, you know, that even if there is that vital window that we now know there probably isn't, I was like, oh, I just don't want to do it. So it was like, oh, okay, now my, you know, 8 months old baby is taking a bottle.
So my daughter would take a bottle really well, and then we were able to stop top-ups, and without even realising, she never had a bottle for a while. And then we just thought, oh, we've got a wedding we're going to, so grandparents are looking after the baby, I'll express, you know, nice little milk stash, bottles all organised for grandma. And yeah, she was just not having it at all. She just refused bottles. And it took us then about 3 months of coaxing her we tried different flow sizes and that kind of thing. That didn't work. And eventually we got her to take it from a cup. And that worked. But yeah, there's clearly no window, because at any random point, if once you start, you've kind of got to keep it going. Otherwise you potentially lose that possibility, which is a bit bit frustrated.
Apart from, there's plenty of families who will find the complete opposite, in that their baby will quite happily go back to a bottle after having a break from using one. So it just seems, from talking to so many different families and setups and hearing so many different ways that people make all of this work for them, there is no window, there's no type that is going to work more. There's ideas, there's tips and there's tricks that you can use to help your baby feed in a different way. But one baby might just be really, really happy at any point, like Theresa was saying about her little one, suddenly at 8 months was like, yeah, this is cool, I can do this. Whereas your little one was happy in the beginning and then changed their mind, and other babies just never want to go there. And something else I wanted to just pick up on as well, to kind of go a little bit backwards about 5 minutes ago. It was really interesting what you were saying about kind of letting partners have that time and find all those different ways of bonding. Something that I think is quite an interesting maybe thing to think about is how accepting you are of your partner and how they might do something differently to you. And that's both ways. But knowing that there isn't just one way of doing something, that everyone's going to have a different approach, and that that's okay, and kind of respecting those differences to allow those relationships to form and to blossom. And of course, dads have a little bit of magic about them, partners in general, bit of magic, that they can do things that a breastfeeding woman can't do, because they don't smell of milk, and it does make a difference, and it can be the change that a little one needs as well.
Definitely. One of the other things I was going to say, Lucy, as well, is you hear a lot about, and Theresa, you've probably got a really good point of view on this, is if you're going back to work and I know your husband was then going to be the main caregiver, but if they're going into nursery, I think a lot of mums panic or worry that, okay, so at 6 months, little one's going into nursery, breastfeeding went really well, we're kind of rocking with it and it's all going really well. Now I need to start expressing. I've not tried a bottle with baby and I need to start introducing that, and at what stage do we do it? So I think there's quite a lot of pressure there. And then from what you hear on the forums and stuff, quite a lot of the time younger babies, slightly older babies, they'll perhaps go to nursery, be quite happy if they're on solids and with a bit of water, and then they'll just sort of catch up after.
Yeah.
But that might be the eventual outcome, and that's what I found happened. But she didn't go into nursery till she was about 13 months, so it was a bit more, she's a bit further down the line. But there's also this anxiety around, there's an expectation that you've got to turn up to nursery in the morning with as many bottles as they would have feeds, and it has to be X amount, and you're leaving them and they might starve. But I think they're quite resilient little things. But I do think that's also one of the other things, that inroads that people find themselves going into expressing with.
Yeah,
definitely.
For us, because I was going back, especially with my first, I went back predominantly on night shifts, and of course at that point they're still waking like an amount of times in the night you can't possibly quantify. You're kind of like, oh, how many times do you wake up in the night? I'm like, I don't know, like 5, 6, 7, I don't know, so many times. And I was like, oh my gosh, is he gonna need milk at every one of, and then I go back to work, he goes to bed for, like, in that way you said, Lucy, about daddies having this magic power of not smelling of breasts and breast milk, like he wouldn't necessarily always sleep through the night, but he would sleep a hell of a lot better when there was no boobs in the house. So he's like, and so all that panic of like, I need to have this much milk because he wakes up this many times in the night, and like, not to say that, because then he would just wake up on the nights I was home, and he still obviously needed that comfort and things. It's just when I wasn't there, he was kind of like, oh, I'll just have a cuddle with daddy, like, oh, it's fine. And so it was that kind of like that surprised me. I was like, oh.
It's interesting as well, that anxiety around having to leave the milk, as you've both just kind of mentioned. There's also the anxiety that it has to be left in a bottle. And actually, when not all, of course, people go back to work at various different times, but many women go back to work towards the end of that first year, and the guideline is actually not to use a bottle after 12 months, but there's a kind of feeling that babies should be able to, that is some kind of I want to say landmark, which is totally the wrong word. What do I mean? But it's a point, you know, yes, the baby has done this now. And actually some babies will never have a bottle because it's actually not needed for them. And it might be just because they continue breastfeeding, or it might be because they find a cup works better for them or something like that. So it's all around those expectations of normal, which actually aren't necessarily what needs to happen. There's lots of other options to kind of consider.
It's always do what's right for you and do what's unique to your situation, but you only discover that when you face these little challenges, don't you? Then you kind of like, well, you know, we figured it out. And there's so many different ways to figure it out, like with like we were saying about letting go and letting your other half do things. I remember having these moments where my husband would sort of say, oh, I did this and this happened, and sort of being so amazed that, you know, you didn't have all the answers, and yet there's times when he'd ask me stuff and I'd be like, well, I don't know. So I honestly think hormones play a massive part in it as well, because you're a little bit kind of all over the place. But yeah, they're a great support, and they do come up with some ingenious sort of ways of getting around things.
Well, that seems like a very positive note to finish on. It's been so interesting hearing both of your stories and your kind of reflections on it, and all of those things. So thank you both very, very much for having this conversation this evening. So for anybody who's watching this, if you can find out more about our Barnardo South Gloucestershire Breastfeeding Support Service by going to our website, www.breastfeedingsouthgloss.co.uk. You can find us all on Bristol Breastfeeding Mummies if you're looking for breastfeeding support, and of course the Bristol Breastfeeding page as well on Facebook. Which both are independently run outside of the service, but we'll always signpost to our services via them. If you've got a topic that you want to talk about, or you'd like to hear us talk about, leave a comment or go onto the website and fill out the contact form and let us know if there's something that you would like to hear mums talk about. So thanks, Theresa and Sam. It's been great, and we'll see everyone another time.
Bye.
Bye.